Hi, everybody. So, the transport of oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout your body, it's not not that tricky, but I found that it's tough to get into students' brains, and I've done it a number of different ways. I've had students do a coloring, and I've tried to walk things through it, and I really hope I'm excited about this particular method. Basically, here again, what we're trying to show is okay. So now we've got oxygen in our bodies and we've got carbon dioxide being made by our bodies. How is it transported? How is the oxygen transported literally through your bloodstream? And you might be saying, "Well, I know that the red blood cells, or I know that hemoglobin." But let's go a little bit more in depth than that. There are multiple methods that these things are transported throughout your blood. We're going to go over the major methods, and I'll just kind of touch on or just kind of briefly state a few other methods that these things are transported. So, a few things that we have to remember first, a few things that we have to review, and you need to know these things. Okay? First of all, the lungs are made of tiny little air sacs called alveoli. Really, what we've got is so you see I circle down there, zoom in. We've got these like, and they look like bunches of grapes, right? This is called an alveolar sac. This whole thing is called an alveolar sac. From it is this alveolar duct. Each of these things is called an alveolus, right? Okay, next. Oxygen, which I'm going to represent with this kind of double circle, this purple double circle throughout my animation. Oxygen diffuses from the alveoli, right? We suck that into the blood, right? The blood that's surrounding your lungs is coming there having given up a lot of its oxygen. So the oxygen in the air in the lungs in the alveoli is going to have a higher partial pressure of oxygen. You could say higher concentration of oxygen, right? Whatever. So those oxygen molecules are going to diffuse from the alveoli, from your lungs, into your bloodstream. So let's watch that. This is going to be an alveolus, this kind of shape right here, the circular shape here, and this is a capillary surrounding it, and the oxygen is going to diffuse in. Now, carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood. Remember, that's being made by your body tissues into the alveoli. I'm going to represent carbon dioxide as this green kind of circle, right? So we got carbon in the middle with two oxygen on either side, but that's how I'm going to represent carbon dioxide, is that little shape right there, and it's kind of a greenish shape. And it's going to be moving from your blood into the alveoli. That's what it does in the lungs area. Right, so if the cells have made all that carbon dioxide, so the blood by the time it gets to the lungs has a lot of carbon dioxide, and it's going to diffuse into the alveoli so it can be breathed out. Now, when we get to the body tissues, that was at the lungs. What about at the tissues? Well, at the tissues, oxygen diffused into the blood at the alveoli, so now it's going to go from the blood into those tissues that are craving the oxygen, right? So those body tissues, those cells, the cell is this kind of rectangular shape with the nucleus over here. Those cells are consuming oxygen, right? They're burning oxygen, burning food with oxygen. So oxygen, remember that purple thing, is going to be diffusing into the cells. And also at the tissues, carbon dioxide is going to go from the tissues where it's being made into the blood. Okay, that's the review. Now, some background stuff that you maybe don't know so much about, but you do need to understand this. So we're going to make sure you take some time and understand this. All right. First of all, that little picture down there, that's how I'm going to represent hemoglobin. We have talked hemoglobin before, so it's just this molecule, this protein, and your red blood cells are filled with millions of these little proteins, and each one can hold on to or can bind to 4 oxygen molecules. You can see how it's bound to 4 different oxygen molecules. So oxygen is mostly carried by hemoglobin, and hemoglobin can bind 4 oxygen molecules. When bound to those oxygen molecules, it's called oxyhemoglobin. Pretty easy, right? Oxyhemoglobin. You might even be able to figure out where I'm going next. When it's not bound to those oxygen molecules, it's called deoxyhemoglobin. And something needs to hold the spot, and it's going to be hydrogen ions. So notice instead of 4 of those purple little molecules here, it's got 4 hydrogen ions attached instead. That's typical. Now, technically, hemoglobin can also hang on to CO2. It doesn't, not nearly as much. I'm going to show you how CO2 is transported later. Actually, I'm going to talk about it right now. Okay, so carbon dioxide is mostly transported actually in the plasma, not by hemoglobin. And pretty much take carbon dioxide, react it with water, do some fancy stuff, and it's going to turn into bicarbonate. Okay, it's just another molecule. All right. So CO2 first combines with water. CO2 plus H2O leads to something called carbonic acid. So look at these two things, CO2, H2O. There's 1 carbon here, 1 carbon here. 1, 2 plus 3 oxygens, 3 oxygens down there. And how many hydrogens up here? Well, none up there, 2 right there, 2 right there. Look, you just add them together, literally. Carbonic acid is H2CO3. So CO2 plus H2O yields H2CO3. Here's how I'm going to represent those things. Remember how I represent the carbon dioxide? It's that little green thing. Water, I'm going to do kind of a water droplet, and then I have a new shape for carbonic acid. All right, so carbon dioxide plus water gives us carbonic acid. That's how it's going to be represented throughout my animation here. Now, if you know anything about acids, and I understand a lot of you may be forgotten, but if you know anything about acids, one of the things that acids do, acids can, well, the type of acid that we're talking about today, they're going to release a hydrogen ion, this proton. That's what acids do. They increase the hydrogen ion concentration in a solution. So what's going to happen is this thing is going to pop off. So let me show you that. Carbonic acid immediately loses a proton to become this bicarbonate that I talked about. So watch that. So here is what we ended with the last one, H2CO3, carbonic acid. Immediately, one of those hydrogens is going to pop off. So look at the difference between these two molecules. Well, this one has 2 hydrogens, this one has 1. Notice the hydrogen ion has a positive charge, so to balance out the charge so that it's equivalent to this thing, there's a negative charge. So bicarbonate is HCO3 minus. That's bicarbonate. And this floats through your bloodstream from your cells to the lungs. So again, this is this thing that we ended with last time, but that hydrogen is going to pop off, and what's left is bicarbonate. Now, the reverse reaction is going to occur at the lungs, right? So that all happened as soon as the carbon dioxide was made at the tissues. Now we move that bicarbonate to the lungs. The reverse reaction can occur. So the whole thing is going to be HCO3 minus, right? That's what we ended with. That's going to be that curvy green shape, plus a hydrogen, that grayish hydrogen, is going to lead to carbonic acid. Carbonic acid then can be broken into CO2 and H2O, and we can literally breathe out the CO2. Now, if I'm getting over your head right now, don't worry. I'm going to show this whole process. I'm going to diagram this whole process. But what we can try to do is we can just follow this diagram. So what I want you to try to do, and I want you to try to do it right now, is memorize this equation. Remember, it's reversible. I just showed it one way. Here, I'm going to show it the other way. Now, this time I'm going to put in these double arrows. It just means it can go this way or it can go that way. So let's look at the beginning part. CO2 plus H2O. Okay, CO2. We've talked about that before. H2O, we know that's water. Just literally put them together. What do we get? Well, we got 2 hydrogens. We got 1 carbon. We got 3 oxygens. H2CO3. Now, that's an acid, so acids are going to release a hydrogen ion. Now, it's important that you memorize this equation, not just for today, right now, but for our future and how we understand homeostasis, how we understand what happens inside of our blood. So it's not even just for this unit, but we're looking units beyond, okay? So those are my symbols. I have shown you all of those already. Right? Carbon dioxide plus water, carbonic acid. Carbonic acid breaks into bicarbonate and a hydrogen ion. All right, so let's actually diagram this process. Let's see how this thing actually works, okay? The whole process. So to begin with, we've got a diagram here. What do we got on the left? On the left, we've got an alveolus. So think about where that is. Well, that's in the lungs. On the right, we've got just a tissue cell somewhere in the body. It could be it could be, let's go with a muscle cell of your leg. I don't know. Okay, or it could be a retina cell of your eye. It doesn't matter. Okay, it's some cell of your body. That cell needs oxygen and it needs to get rid of carbon dioxide. Okay, so let's start over on the left. In, you suck in a big old breath, and of course, what we want to take in is going to be the oxygen. So that's all oxygen. Remember, the purple is the oxygen. Now that oxygen starts to diffuse into the bloodstream. I forgot to mention before that we got the artery here, we got a vein down here. Remember, there's no blue blood, but it just to show like which way we're going to be circulating. We've also got hemoglobin. Now, which type of hemoglobin is that? That's going to be deoxyhemoglobin because it doesn't have the 4 oxygens. Remember, 1, 2, 3, 4 oxygens is what it should have if it's oxyhemoglobin, but it has hydrogen instead. Okay, so now that's going to circulate, and oxygen actually displaces one of the hydrogen ions. Okay, now once that happens, the rest of hemoglobin actually will change shape a little bit. It changes in conformation, and it makes it a lot easier for other oxygens to bind and kick off the rest of the hydrogens. So now we have oxyhemoglobin. Oxyhemoglobin gets transported through the bloodstream, through the arteries, all the way to the tissues. Now I'm going to take a break here. I'm just going to pause here for a second with oxygen, right? So eventually this oxygen is going to go into this cell, sure. But just give me a second here. The cell is making a bunch of carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide starts to diffuse. I'm not showing all of it diffusing into, right? That's not how diffusion works, but just some of it diffuses into the bloodstream. And it's going to have to get transported over to here and breathed out. Now, a little bit of that carbon dioxide can dissolve directly into the blood or the plasma. Okay, just a tiny bit. Some of it might actually wind up taking the place of oxygen here, just a tiny bit of it. Not much. That's not generally how it's done. That's not the majority of the way it's done. So instead, can you remember what it gets transformed into? Well, first it's got to combine with water. So here's the equation. CO2, H2O leads to, do you remember what that's called? That's called carbonic acid. So there's carbonic acid. Do you remember what happened next? Acids do what acids do. They release a proton, a hydrogen ion. So that hydrogen ion is going to pop off, right? So over here now we're saying carbonic acid, H plus pops off. And then those pieces that remain are going to be bicarbonate. So carbonic acid, bicarbonate, H plus. So those bicarbonates now get circulated and they wind up going through the veins and they wind up getting taken then eventually, sure, to the through the heart, and then the heart pumps them up to the pulmonary arteries, and the reverse reaction occurs. Look at that. The hydrogens that were over there, it's going to balance out, right? So the bicarbonate combines with hydrogen ions to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid can get transformed into CO2 and H2O. Now the H2O, the water, well, that just becomes part of the plasma. And the CO2 can diffuse, okay, there goes the H2O, can diffuse into the alveolus and breathe out. Now what about the oxygen up here, right, on the hemoglobin? Well, that continues its trek along. And do you remember what was holding the place of these oxygens before? When it was deoxyhemoglobin? Oh, that's right. It was hydrogens. Interesting. So, same story as before. It's called cooperativity. When one binds, it makes it easier for the other to bind. Right? Since there's less oxygen in this area, it's less likely that oxygen is going to wind up rebinding onto this thing. So, some oxygen diffuses off. Hydrogen takes its place, a little bit more hydrogen takes its place, oxygen winds up diffusing into the cells wind up sucking that out. And hemoglobin can continue, deoxyhemoglobin continues on its trek. All right, we're going to go through this one more time. I'm going to kind of combine the stories eventually, so just kind of try to stay with me, try to predict what's going to happen next. All right, so what's this again? This is going to be deoxyhemoglobin. And for this one more time, what happens now? Well, some oxygen takes the place of some of the hydrogen. Well, that makes it now easier for more oxygen to bind. Now we've got oxyhemoglobin. Excuse me. And oxyhemoglobin travels to the tissues where carbon dioxide is being created. Carbon dioxide diffuses out, combines with water to form what again? Combines with water to form carbonic acid. Now, carbonic acids break apart right away, remember? And what's this arch thing called again? It's called bicarbonate. Bicarbonate can start to diffuse over. Now notice I'm going to do two things at once here. I'm going to do two things at once, right? Bicarbonate just got to the alveolus, and the oxygen on the hemoglobin, the oxyhemoglobin, just got to the tissue cells. All right. So I just kind of did the thing with the hydrogens right away. So the hydrogen combined over here with the bicarbonate to form carbonic acid. And over here, hydrogen took the place of oxygen. So now I like looking on the right-hand side. That's going to be pretty easy to see what happens next, right? What's going to happen over here on the right? Well, those oxygens are going to wind up going into the cell, and the cell is going to consume them. Do you remember what happens over here? We have carbonic acid. Well, is it going to give up that hydrogen? No, wait. What do we want to have happen? We want to breathe out carbon dioxide. So remember, carbonic acid is basically just two things put together. What was it put together again? That's right. It was carbon dioxide and water. So now we can take an enzyme, split those things. Notice what happened on the right. Here the oxygen's leaving, but over here we're splitting the carbonic acid back into carbon dioxide and water. The water immediately became part of the plasma. The carbon dioxide winds up getting breathed out. All right, the whole process then just keeps happening and happening and happening. I hope that was helpful, and I will hope to see you soon.